In 1809, a Cherokee chief, his beaded tunic swaying as he rode a sturdy horse, oversaw nearly 600 black slaves toiling in fields, their chains clinking under the Georgia sun. Yet, hidden within the tribe, the Ketowah society whispered plans to free them, defying their own kin. Historian Kenneth W. Porter notes, "Some Indians treated slaves with a humanity rarely seen among whites. Why did a people fighting for their own freedom both bind and liberate others? Unravel this paradox to understand their untold story. Slavery bound lives across every civilization, and Native American tribes were no exception. Through brutal raids and battles, they captured men, women, and children from rival tribes, white settlers, and, later, black slaves, their labor sustaining tribal survival." Historian Barbara Krauthammer notes that native slavery predated European contact, while by 1800, Claudio Sant estimates southeastern tribes held thousands of black slaves bought from British traders. This complex role, entwining them in the transatlantic slave trade, challenges the view of Native Americans as mere victims, revealing a duality that demands scrutiny. Unlike the rigid racial hierarchies of European slavery, Native American enslavement hinged on tribal rivalries, not skin color. Conflicts over hunting grounds, water sources, or trade routes fueled these captures as tribes sought to weaken their enemies. Ethnohistorian James F. Brooks notes that among the Navajo, captives were often taken to assert dominance over rival clans, not to enforce racial supremacy. A 1720 Spanish report details how the Comanche enslaved Ute women to weave blankets, their skills vital to trade networks. This cultural lens, rooted in survival and power, distinguished native slavery from the chattel systems of white planters, yet it still bound lives in chains. The purpose of these captives was often pragmatic, filling gaps left by war or disease. Slaves replaced fallen warriors or laborers, ensuring the tribe's endurance. In the 18th century, the Creek Nation, as documented by trader James Adair, absorbed captives to bolster their workforce after smallpox outbreaks decimated villages. These slaves planted corn or hunted game, their sweat sustaining tribal economies. Krauthammer argues that this practice reflected a communal ethos, where captives were not mere property but vital to collective survival. Yet, this integration came at the cost of freedom, a bitter price for those torn from their homes. Orphaned children and captives often found a new home among native tribes, raised as full members with no mark of their origins. Historian Tyre Miles notes that among the Cherokee and Huron, such adoptions were common, blending captives into tribal life. Cynthia Ann Parker, captured by the Comanche in 1836 at age 9, grew up as one of them, her life bound to their ways. When returned to white society in 1860, she wept, unable to leave her Comanche kin, as S.C. Gwynn details. Her story reveals a truth. For some, captivity became family, built on the ashes of a lost past. As European influence grew, native tribes encountered black runaway slaves, and their responses varied starkly. Some offered sanctuary, others imposed harsh labor. In the 1790s, the Seminole welcomed runaways, arming them as warriors, while the Ketowah, as noted by historian Angela Pulley Hudson, treated black slaves as mere laborers. This divergence stemmed from tribal values and alliances. The Seminole, resisting white encroachment, saw runaways as allies, while tribes trading with whites adopted their prejudices. Miles estimates that by 1830, thousands of black runaways lived among southeastern tribes, their fates tied to the whims of their hosts. The Iroquois Confederacy, spanning Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, stood apart for its chilling brutality. French chroniclers in the 17th century described captives enduring days of torture, their bodies burned or cut to break their spirits. Black and white prisoners alike faced these rituals, their screams echoing through Iroquois longhouses. Historian Daniel K. Richter argues that such practices were not mere cruelty but a cultural rite, proving the captive's endurance before adoption or death. This grim spectacle, while rare, cemented the Iroquois' fearsome reputation a stark contrast to tribes offering refuge. In the 1760s, colonial authorities in New York pressed the Huron and Delaware to return escaped slaves, citing treaty obligations. Yet, no records, as historian Brett Rushforth notes, show compliance. These tribes, wary of colonial power, likely shielded runaways to assert autonomy. A 1765 letter from a British official laments the Delawares' refusal, highlighting their defiance. This quiet rebellion hints at a broader resistance, as tribes navigated the pressures of European expansion while grappling with the moral weight of slavery. This navigation led the 5 civilized tribes, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, to adopt European ways, including black slavery. By the late 18th century, they embraced centralized governments, Christianity, and literacy, hoping to secure their lands. Saunt documents how the Cherokee owned over 1,500 black slaves by 1830, their plantations mimicking those of white Southerners. This assimilation, born of survival, entangled them in the very systems oppressing them. Their story, one of adaptation and contradiction, sets the stage for a deeper reckoning with their role in slavery's dark legacy. The 5 civilized tribes adopted European customs, not out of admiration, but from a desperate hope to shield their people from persecution and land theft. They built schools, drafted constitutions, and knelt in Christian churches, believing these acts would prove their worth to white authorities. Historian Theda Perdue records that by the 1820s, Cherokee leaders wore tailored coats and spoke English fluently, mimicking Southern elites. Yet, this strategy crumbled. The 1830 Indian Removal Act forced thousands from their ancestral homes, their European trappings no shield against betrayal. This bitter irony reveals a people caught between survival and surrender, their efforts mocked by history's relentless march. For some, survival meant clinging to slavery's grim machinery. The Chickasaw and Choctaw, unlike their kin, delayed freeing their black slaves until 1866, a full year after the Civil War's end. Only federal intervention, backed by the 13th Amendment, compelled their compliance. Ethnohistorian Barbara Krauthamer notes that in 1865, Choctaw leaders still held over 2,000 slaves, their plantations sprawling across Mississippi. This reluctance exposes a troubling truth. Some tribes, emulating white planters, profited from human bondage long after the moral tide had turned, their fields stained with the sweat of the enslaved. The Cherokee emerged as major players in the slave trade, owning nearly 600 black slaves by 1809, rising to 1,600 by 1830, bought from white traders with furs and gold, as Claudio Sant notes. These slaves endured harsh lives, toiling in fields or building cabins, their days marked by toil in rough huts, as Tia Miles describes. Unlike captives in some tribes, they rarely found acceptance, their treatment echoing the cruelties of white plantations. This brutal commerce, rivaling Southern elites, marks the Cherokee as both victims and oppressors, their legacy stained by the chains they forged. This oppression was codified in the Cherokee Constitution, which barred children of black women from tribal membership. A mother's heritage, no matter her loyalty, condemned her child to exclusion. Historian William G. McLaughlin notes that this rule, enacted in the 1820s, entrenched racial divides within the tribe. A black woman, her hands calloused from weaving baskets, could never see her child stand as Cherokee. This legal barrier, cold and deliberate, wove prejudice into the tribe's very fabric, echoing the racial hierarchies of their white neighbors. The Cherokee deepened this divide in their 1839 Act of Union, revised in 1855, which refused to recognize marriages between Cherokee and black slaves. A warrior might love a slave woman, but their bond held no weight in tribal law. Perdue's research reveals cases of Cherokee men punished for such unions, their families shunned. This rejection ensured that black slaves remained outsiders, their lives bound by labor, not love. The law's rigidity, carved in ink, stood as a testament to a tribe grappling with identity amid colonial pressures. After the Civil War, the Cherokee's stance hardened further. Black slaves who returned, hoping for freedom and belonging, were denied citizenship. Chief Louis Downing, clad in a feathered headdress, argued for their inclusion in 1866, his voice ringing in tribal councils. Yet, the National Council, swayed by elites, overruled him. Sant estimates that hundreds of freedmen were expelled, labeled intruders by a tribe fearful of change. This betrayal, stark against Downing's pleas, reveals a community torn between justice and tradition, their choices echoing long after. Yet not all Cherokee embraced this cruelty. The Ketowah Society, a secret band of abolitionists, defied their own people to protect runaway slaves. By night, they guided fugitives through dense forests, their lanterns dim to avoid detection. Crowther documents their work in the 1840s, noting that dozens of slaves found safety through their underground railroad. These rebels, risking exile, embodied a quiet heroism, their whispers of freedom a counterpoint to the tribe's broader complicity. Across the Mississippi, the Chickasaw built their economy on black slave labor, their fields blooming with cotton, corn, and tobacco. Slaves also tended livestock and poultry, their work feeding both the tribe and white markets. A 1837 report, cited by historian Arel M. Planks, Gibson counts over 1,200 slaves in Chickasaw territory, their labor generating wealth, rivaling small southern estates. Men drove oxen, women plucked feathers, their lives bound to the rhythm of agrarian profit. This reliance on slavery, pragmatic yet brutal, tied the Chickasaw to the very systems that threatened their sovereignty. The Chickasaw embraced racial hierarchies, favoring white mixed members for leadership while scorning those with black ancestry. Tia Miles notes that by the 1830s, white mixed warriors dominated tribal councils, their status assured, while black mixed kin were barred from power. Those forming ties with black individuals faced fines, whippings, or exile, with Arel M. Gibson citing penalties of up to 50 bushels of corn. This harsh policy, echoing white Southern prejudices, tied the Chickasaw to a system that valued purity over humanity, reshaping their once egalitarian ways. Across the Southeast, the Creek Nation navigated a different path with black runaways. Some found refuge, welcomed into Creek villages, yet they were often seen as lesser due to their plantation labor. A runaway man, his hands calloused from picking cotton, might be given a hoe to till Creek fields, his status barely above that of a servant. Ethnohistorian Angela Pulley Hudson notes that in the 1790s, Creek leaders sheltered dozens of fugitives, valuing their labor but not their equality. This uneasy acceptance, born of pragmatism, revealed the Creek's complex dance between resistance and complicity. Yet, pragmatism sometimes turned cold. In certain cases, the Creek sold runaways back to white owners, pocketing silver to secure trade alliances. A 1785 colonial report, cited by historian Claudio Sant, describes a Creek warrior exchanging a fugitive for a musket and cloth, his decision swift and mercenary. This betrayal, though not universal, underscored a grim reality. Survival often trumped solidarity. For the runaway, recaptured and chained, the Creek's protection proved as fleeting as a shadow, their hopes snuffed out by the lure of profit. By the 1850s, after the forced march west along the Trail of Tears, the Creek Nation's reliance on slavery grew stark. Roughly 10% of their population, some 2,000 souls, were black slaves, toiling in fields or tending livestock. Tia Miles, in her study of Creek society, details how these slaves, often purchased from white traders, worked under overseers wielding whips. Their labor fueled the tribe's new life in Indian Territory, yet their presence marked a shift. The Creek, once reluctant slaveholders, had embraced a system that echoed the cruelties they fled, their fields a mirror of the South they left behind. Farther south, the Choctaw's 1840 Constitution drew a hard line against black freedom. Freedmen or runaways were barred from settling in Choctaw lands, their dreams of owning a plot of earth forbidden. A black man, his clothes tattered from escape, would be turned away at the border, his pleas ignored. Historian Barbara Krautimer cites tribal records, showing that by 1840, Choctaw leaders expelled dozens of freedmen, fearing their influence. This exclusion, etched in law, ensured that black lives remained tethered to servitude, their futures as rootless as the winds. In contrast, white men found a warmer welcome. With written permission from a chief, they could live among the Choctaw. Their children with Choctaw women granted full citizenship. A white trader, his hat tipped low, might marry a Choctaw woman, their son growing up to vote in tribal councils. Theda Perdue notes that by the 1830s, over 100 white men had settled in Choctaw territory, their families woven into the tribe's fabric. This privilege, stark against the black exclusion, revealed a hierarchy shaped by colonial alliances, where whiteness opened doors that blackness could not. The Choctaw initially tolerated Christian missionaries, their churches rising amid tribal villages. But when these preachers, clad in black robes, denounced slavery as a sin, tensions flared. By the 1840s, as documented by historian William G. McLaughlin, Choctaw leaders expelled missionaries who dared challenge their slaveholding ways. A missionary, his Bible clutched tightly, was escorted from the nation, his school shuttered. This rejection, firm yet polite, signaled the Choctaws' resolve to protect their economy, even at the cost of clashing with the faith they had partly embraced. Like their white counterparts, the Choctaw guarded against slave literacy, fearing the spark of rebellion. A slave caught with a book might face lashes, his curiosity deemed a threat. Krautimer's research reveals that in 1845, a Choctaw overseer destroyed a hidden school where slaves learned to read, its teacher flogged. This suppression, cold and calculated, ensured that knowledge remained a privilege, not a right. For the enslaved, the written word was as distant as freedom, their minds chained as tightly as their bodies. In Florida's swamps, the Seminole welcomed black runaways, treating them and their children as equals. A woman, her child at her side, joined the tribe as a full member, her son trained as a warrior. Kenneth W. Porter estimates that by 1815, over 600 runaways found refuge in Seminole villages, many armed or farming, alongside their hosts. This bold inclusivity, a beacon for those fleeing bondage, offered freedom amid a hostile world, though recapture loomed as a constant threat. After the First Seminole War, the risks of harboring runaways grew heavy. White planters, enraged by Seminole raids, demanded their property back, and some Seminole leaders complied to avoid bloodshed. A warrior, his musket slung across his back, might escort a trembling fugitive to a white trader, receiving blankets in exchange. Claudio Saunt's analysis of 1820s Spanish records notes that dozens of runaways were returned, their hopes crushed. This pragmatic retreat, born of survival, dimmed the Seminoles' reputation as liberators, revealing the brutal pressures that shaped their choices. The specter of a broader rebellion loomed large. General Thomas Jessup, commanding U.S. forces in 1836, warned that a second Seminole War could ignite a massive slave uprising. He feared black runaways, allied with Seminole warriors and perhaps other tribes, might sweep through the South, torching plantations. Military dispatches, cited by historian John K. Mahon, described Jessup's dread of a general conflagration in Florida. His anxiety, rooted in the Seminoles' armed black allies, underscored the volatile power of this unlikely coalition, a spark that threatened to reshape the region. When the U.S. government forced tribes westward to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, in the 1830s, the Seminole carried their black slaves along the Trail of Tears. Men and women, chained yet marching beside Seminole families, faced a grueling journey. Theda Perdue's research indicates that by 1838, over 500 black slaves accompanied the Seminole, their labor destined for new fields. This migration, born of dispossession, extended slavery's reach into the frontier, tying the Seminole to a system they once resisted, their lives reshaped by the same forces that uprooted them. In Indian Territory, tensions flared with the Creek Nation, some of whom embraced chattel slavery's brutal efficiency. Seminole villages, once havens, faced Creek raids seeking to steal black slaves. A Seminole elder, his staff raised in defiance, might rally warriors to repel these attacks. But some Seminole adopted Creek practices, buying slaves to work their lands. Barbara Crouthamer notes that by the 1840s, a small Seminole minority held over 100 slaves, a shift that fractured their communal ethos. This clash, subtle yet corrosive, revealed the creeping influence of colonial systems. Some, like the family of Pompey Factor, a black Seminole, fled this turmoil. In the 1840s, they crossed into Mexico, where slavery had been abolished in 1829. Factor, clad in a woven tunic, led his kin through deserts, evading Creek pursuers. Tia Miles documents that dozens of black Seminole families reached safety, building free communities in Coahuila. Their escape, daring and desperate, stood as a rebuke to the chains that bound them, proof that freedom, though distant, was worth every step. Yet, not all native-held slaves faced such peril. Many lived better lives than those under white masters, their days less marred by cruelty. A black slave in a Choctaw village might share meals with his hosts, his children playing freely. Ethno-historian James F. Brooks estimates that in the 1830s, over 3,000 black slaves in native territories enjoyed relative autonomy, some even owning tools or livestock. This contrast, though not universal, challenges the monolithic view of slavery, highlighting a spectrum of experiences shaped by tribal values. Some tribes rejected slavery entirely, offering runaways full membership. The Muskogee, for instance, welcomed fugitives as kin, teaching them to hunt or weave. A runaway, his scars fading, might stand in a Muskogee council, his voice heard. Angela Pulley Hudson's research shows that by 1820, hundreds of runaways were adopted into such tribes, their pasts erased. This embrace, rooted in communal bonds, stood as a quiet act of defiance, a refusal to bow to the slaveholding world encroaching upon them. Not all approved of this leniency. Douglas Cooper, a white Indian agent in the 1840s, scoffed at tribes treating black slaves with near equality. He urged them to adopt white methods, his letters, cited by Crouthamer, dripping with disdain for undisciplined native practices. A Choctaw chief, his pipe in hand, might have ignored Cooper's advice, wary of white interference. This criticism, laced with arrogance, exposed the colonial urge to control, even as tribes navigated their own moral landscapes. Frederick Douglass, in 1850, offered a different view. Speaking in Rochester, he declared that slaves found more of the milk of human kindness among Native Americans than with white Christian masters. His words, recorded in his newspaper, The North Star, praised tribes like the Seminole for their humanity. A black fugitive, sheltered by a Seminole family, might have nodded in agreement, his life spared by their care. Douglass's tribute, bold and unyielding, reframed native slaveholding as a complex act, often kinder than the cruelties of white plantations. Some native women took this kindness further, buying male slaves to free and marry them. In the 1790s, a Cherokee woman, her shawl embroidered with clan symbols, might pay a trader for a black man, then grant him liberty. Their children, born free under tribal law, grew up as Cherokee. William G. McLaughlin notes that dozens of such unions occurred, defying colonial norms. These acts, tender yet defiant, wove new families into the tribal tapestry, their love a quiet rebellion against a world of chains. Such unions sparked outrage in slave-holding states. White planters, clutching their ledgers, condemned native women marrying black men, fearing blurred racial lines. A 1780 Virginia law, cited by Saunt, fined whites for similar acts. A policy extended to native lands by custom. This backlash, fierce and fearful, underscored the era's obsession with racial purity, a cage that native women broke with every vow they took. The diversity of native slavery defied simple labels. Tribal laws and councils governed captives' fates, from adoption to servitude. A Seneca elder, his voice steady, might decree a white captive's integration, while a Choctaw court sentenced a black slave to labor. Crowther's studies reveal that by 1800, over 50 tribes had formal rules for captives, each unique. This mosaic, intricate and varied, challenges the notion of a singular native stance, demanding a nuanced reckoning with their role. Treatment of black slaves ranged from brutal to equitable, a spectrum shaped by tribal culture. A Cherokee slave might toil under a whip, while a Seminole runaway hunted beside his hosts. Miles estimates that in the 1830s, 20% of native-held slaves faced harsh conditions, the rest living with relative dignity. This variance, stark and undeniable, reflects the complexity of native slaveholding, neither wholly cruel nor wholly benevolent, but a mirror of human contradiction. Ultimately, Native American slavery, though not universal, was deeply entwined with the black slave trade. By 1830, southeastern tribes held over 8,000 black slaves, their labor fueling tribal economies. Saunt argues that this participation, driven by survival, complicates narratives of native victimhood. A Cherokee planter, his boots dusty from inspecting fields, stood as both oppressed and oppressor, his life a paradox. This entanglement, raw and unyielding, demands we confront the full weight of history, where no story is simple and every truth carries a cost.